This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 12th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who sent me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The Gospel of the Lord. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, says the teacher in today's first reading. From beginning to end, the book of Ecclesiastes laments how all is vanity. And in Hebrew, the word that's translated as vanity implies lacking any purpose. What's the purpose? The writer asks. What's the purpose of my hard work? What's the purpose of being wise and having understanding? What's the purpose of all the stuff that I've accumulated? Ecclesiastes goes on like this for 12 chapters. And by the end, there is not really a satisfying answer to the question, what's the purpose? It's honestly pretty depressing. But the question remains. And it's really the question that Jesus is lifting up in today's parable. As the reading begins, a guy comes up to Jesus and he tries to triangulate him in a family fight over the inheritance. We don't know exactly what the fight was all about, and Jesus is not interested in getting sucked into it. But Jesus is willing to use this occasion to lift up the question, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of this inheritance? What's the meaning? Whatever it is, if it has no purpose, it lacks meaning and real value. And so Jesus tells this parable about a guy who is already rich, but whose land produces a bumper crop. He has so much stuff, he's got no place to store it. Now, there's no suggestion in this story that the rich man shouldn't have this bumper crop. There's no indication that he hasn't worked hard on his farm, and there's no reason to suspect that he's exploited his laborers. So the problem is not the bumper crop itself. Rather, the issue is that the bumper crop, it has no purpose. He's just going to stick it in a barn and hope that he can be fat, dumb, and happy for years to come. But since God tells him that he's going to suddenly die that night, it highlights the fact that his wealth really has no purpose and no meaning. In fact, he lacks any kind of real wealth in the sight of God. So what is it that might have given his wealth purpose? What would have made him rich toward God, as Jesus says at the end of the parable? Well, parables like this are intended to cause us to ask such questions, and there are many answers and many possibilities, but I would suggest at least three. The abundance of this guy, this bumper crop, has no purpose because he lacks thankfulness. The bumper crop, it's a great thing. But even today, what might be a bumper crop could be easily wiped out by drought, insects, or storms. When this guy considers his great abundance, he does not pause for even a moment to give thanks to God that this has happened. And he doesn't appreciate that God has given him the ability to live in a time and place which has allowed this abundance to flourish. He just goes on and has a conversation with himself as though he were alone in the universe without any help if things don't go so well next year. The abundance of this guy has no purpose because he lacks the desire to share his abundance. He thinks only of how he can eat, drink, and be merry by himself. He doesn't even say, "Hey, I can have big parties and invite my friends and family over for meals." And he certainly isn't considering how he might help those in his community who had not been so fortunate. After all, even from a practical standpoint, some of those crops will rot and go bad if he just tries to hoard them for himself. But he never even gives a thought to sharing with anybody else. And his great wealth, his great abundance, his bumper crop, it has no purpose because he has no thought of generosity for the future. At the end of the story, God asks him, "The things you have prepared, whose will they be?" Now, sometimes we read that as a rhetorical question, but it's not. Who would benefit from this guy's abundance when he died, whether that was imminent or decades off? It seems he had never given that a thought, and certainly didn't have a plan. Now, we sometimes read this parable and we don't pay a lot of attention to it because it sounds like this is about what you should do or not do if you are rich beyond imagination. That's how the story starts. This guy is rich beyond imagination, and so we are tempted to file it under that, well, I'll remember this if I'm ever lucky enough to be in that situation. Please, God, let me be in that situation so that I can figure that out. But that's not really what Jesus intends. Instead, Jesus tells this parable to everybody, and it's about considering the purpose of whatever abundance we actually have, and considering how it is that that purpose can help us also to be rich toward God. And for us too, purpose simply cannot be found in how much stuff we have or don't have. Rather, it's often the case for us that we find purpose through thankfulness. And that's often hard in our society. We constantly get told that no matter how much we have, we should have more. There is always somebody who has more than us. And we don't really have an abundance unless we rank up there with the top 0.1% and have net worth like Elon Musk or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. But thankfulness is about recognizing what you do have. In the parable, the guy with the bumper crop, he may have worked hard for what he had, but if a drought had come along, it would not have mattered. And giving thanks to God is a way of reminding ourselves that we are not in this life by ourselves. God is with us, giving us strength and helping us to manage even when we don't feel like we have a huge abundance. And when we're able to give thanks for what we have, then what we have actually has the purpose of reminding us of God's presence and God's generosity in our lives. And that realization makes us rich toward God. For us too, purpose is often found in sharing. I mean, you and I, we all need stuff to live. But it's really hard to have more than the bare minimum and feel like it has a purpose if it doesn't make a difference in somebody else's life. You know, even when I did some small things like this week, I went out and I bought school supplies for kids in Montgomery County. That very act of sharing helps me to recognize and realize that my abundance has purpose and meaning beyond myself. There actually is purpose in having things when you can share them. And over again in the New Testament, we're called to see sharing as one of the things that makes us rich toward God. And it is the case sometimes for us too, that purpose comes through our generosity beyond even our lifetime. You know, the question, those things you have prepared, whose will they be? That's not a rhetorical question for us either. Almost 30 years ago, I took a personal finance class. We had been given some money at the church I was serving, and I was commanded that I would be a trustee, and I thought, I know nothing about this. So I took this class, and the professor who taught this at AU, he said, you know, he was talking to most of us, most of us were in our 20s, and he said, you know, I'm gonna teach you how to save and invest, and I want you to all plan to live into your 90s. And we thought, that's pretty good. We'll plan to live into our 90s. And then he says, because, you know, if you don't plan and you live into your 90s, then if you run out of money, you're going to be in trouble. And we thought, okay, great, we're going to live into our 90s. And then he says, but most of you won't. I thought, that's sort of depressing. But he says, but if you don't, and a bunch of you won't even make it to retirement, if you do this, you will have amassed things that you can share with your family, with charitable organizations, with your religious organizations, with organizations and people who have meaning to you, and you can have a legacy beyond your own lifetime. And that class was a reminder to me all the time ever since, that amassing things and having abundance means that there is purpose beyond myself and beyond my lifetime. Indeed, purpose is found in the good that you can have your abundance. Abundance cannot have a purpose if it's just about whoever has the most toys at the end wins. But if in fact I realize that at any point, if God says to me, hey, your life is over now, I have been given something that I can use to actually reflect the generosity of God even beyond my own lifetime. And that is one of the things that gives abundance purpose, and it's one of the things that helps make us rich toward God. What's the purpose? Asked the writer of Ecclesiastes. And through this parable, Jesus tells us that purpose is using whatever we have, our time, our efforts, our possessions, in ways that make us rich toward God. Yet finding meaning and purpose that makes us rich toward God can never be centered on ourselves. Instead, purpose is found in the kind of thankfulness that reminds us of God's constant presence and help in our lives. Purpose is found in sharing our abundance with others so that we become agents of God's love and God's presence in the life of the world around us. And purpose is found in the kind of generosity that reflects the constant generosity that God showers upon each of us, each and every day. Amen.